Alright, so today is our fourth and last lecture, and we'll deal with the last technology that we will be configuring onto our systems, which is DNS. So DNS stands for Domain Name Service, and the idea behind it is that we humans don't need to remember IP addresses in order to access other computers on the internet. Alright, so this idea started very early on at the beginnings of the internet. People, when the internet consisted of a few tens of computers, they just knew the IP addresses and they could just connect to them remotely. But later on that became impossible, so they decided to give meaningful names so that you know pretty much which computer you're going to actually be accessing. So in order to do this, there needs to be some sort of translation in place. So we need to be typing in computer names, and the system on its own needs to be pointing to an IP address for any specific name. The way this used to happen in the beginning, in the very early days, there used to be, or rather there is actually still, a file in your system called hosts and sits in the etc directory. So that etc hosts file is basically a map for your computer to say exactly what IP address corresponds to what computer name. At the moment, that file on your system should only have its own name. So it should only know the name of Prometheus, NetLab, or TCUK, or whatever your computer is called, and then whatever IP address you have. So in the older years, they would have host files like this, and whoever created a new computer and made it publicly available on the internet, they would have to upload that host file via FTP onto a server where everybody would go and get it once a week, and that way they would have all of the new computer names available. Of course, this at some point became unmanageable because thousands and thousands of new computers started joining the internet, and so that was impossible to do anymore. So they came up with a new system of doing this. Now, the way that it generally works is you have a name for a computer that means everything for it. So we call it a fully qualified domain name, so that's a FQDN, and this means that it's your computer's, let's say, name and surname. All right. So if we take, for example, one of the computers in the lab, so let's say my computer's name is Shumi, for Schumacher, they're all F1 drivers, yeah? However, my FQDN for Shumi is shumi.netlab.ee.port.ac.uk. All of these between the dots actually, of course, mean something. So if it has NetLab in the name, then it means that it's a computer that belongs to A2.net. Only the computers in A2.net have the word or the domain or the subdomain NetLab inside of them. After that, we have EE, which is a legacy name that we keep for sentimental reasons. It stands for electronic engineering, and all of the computers on the second floor of Anglesey building have this in their names. After that, you have the port part, which means that this belongs to the University of Portsmouth, so it's a computer that belongs to the University of Portsmouth domain. And then we have the .ac part, which stands for academic, which means that this computer is a part of JANET, which is a joint academic network, which is the ISP essentially that provides internet to all of the universities in the UK. And of course, in the end, we have .uk, because that's our tier 1 ISP provider that gives you internet access if you want to be on a computer and if you are in the UK. So shumi.netlab.ee.port.ac.uk means all of these things. For each of those domains, there is a server somewhere that is responsible for it. Okay, so this is what we call the authoritative server. So for the NetLab domain, the authoritative server is our server in the class, which is called Columbus, which is our server slash router slash firewall slash everything. Okay. The EE domain has Tiger, which is another domain server that exists somewhere on the second floor. Then the university itself has other domain servers. For the port domain, JANET has its own, and the UK Tier 1 ISP provider also has its own DNS servers for anything that ends in the UK. All right, so what we will do in this lab is we will create our own new subdomain, and we will build, configure, and run the authoritative server for that subdomain. So the names that we will have for our computers will be whatever they were before. So you will have still Prometheus, vPrometheus 0, vPrometheus 1, and so on. But now they will be renamed into dot the name of your computer, so that will be some F1 driver, Coulthard, Senna, whatever it is, .NETLAB port AC UK. All right, so we're adding one more subdomain to that already frustratingly long name of it. All right, so the way that we'll do this, the domain names that you will create will be whatever is the little sticker on your computer monitor that is the actual name of your computer. Remember, all of your computers, all of your main virtual servers are called Prometheus. However, so at the moment, all of your computers are called Prometheus.NETLAB port AC UK. So we cannot run it like this because they all have the same names. Yeah? So if we add one more subdomain with the name of the computer that you're on, that will create unique subdomains for each of your computers, for each of your little networks of virtual machines anyway, and then we can differentiate your computers through that name. So that's what we will do. So in order to do this, we need a couple of things. So first of all, we need the network structure to be in place. So first of all, you need to have your network working correctly. So in the previous lab sheet, you would have configured routing. That still needs to be working correctly. So you need to power on all of your virtual machines inside Prometheus, and they need to be able to ping to the outside world. All right. This means that they have internet access, and of course, yes, you should be able to ping google.com because you are depending on the labs, on Columbus's DNS server. So the DNS server setting that you will have at the moment will be something like 148.197.28.251. All right. So to get this to work, we will need to first of all rename all of our computers, including Prometheus. So you need to start up all of your virtual machines, and you need to implement this on Prometheus as well. You need to go into the etc. host name file, add the name of the computer that you're working on there as a subdomain, so Senna, Coulthard, whatever it is, and then restart the machine. The name change only takes effect if you restart the computer that you are renaming. So you need to reboot Prometheus, and then once you do that, you need to start up your VP 0, 1, and 2, rename them by editing the hostname file, and then restarting them as well. This is the first step. The second step is that you need to configure everything on your server to actually run the DNS service. The DNS service is called bind. So on Prometheus, you will need to install bind, and all you need to do is yum-y install bind and bind utils. That will fetch the software that's required and all of its dependencies from the internet. And remember, you only need to do this on Prometheus. So all of the steps that we're doing here will only need to happen on Prometheus itself because you're only configuring your server as a DNS server. Once you do that, once bind is installed, you will need to configure it. There are various configuration files that you need in order to achieve this, and I will go through all of them one by one. And also, we have examples of those files on Moodle as well. So it's recommended that you download the example files and just make the necessary changes into them in order to reflect, for the configuration to reflect your network settings. So all you are changing are computer names and IP addresses. That's it. You shouldn't need to change anything else in those files. So bind is configured mainly by a configuration file that's called named.conf. So this is the file that we'll need to change first. The first thing that we'll need to tell this file is we'll need to configure the listening IP address. So we'll need to tell our server which IP address our server is actually running. So this means that on this line, which says listen on port 53 is the named service port, you need to listen on to the loopback interface. This is the default because all computers have a loopback interface, and to your 147.197.28.something. That dot something will be the IP address of your Prometheus virtual machine, your server, on to subnet 28. So it will be whatever was on your host plus 50 that you've used when you were building Prometheus. Once you do that, you then need to go a couple of lines further down, and you need to allow access to networks in order for them to be able to query the server. So first you need to tell the server where it's running, and secondly you need to tell everybody else around them, or actually tell the server itself as well, who is allowed to actually ask questions on this server, who is allowed, who has permissions to query that server for information. In our case, what we're doing is we're allowing all of subnet 28, 30, 31, and 32. You don't need to make any changes to this line. It's only there, and it's only highlighted because it's very important, because if it's not, and everything else is correctly configured on your server, the server will still not work because nobody is allowed to ask it anything. Okay. And we've made it as simple as possible, plus there is a reason for it towards the end of the lab sheet. We've included the entirety of subnets 28, 30, 31, and 32. If you remember from last week and the week before, when we were building our network, we've divided our subnets 30, 31, and 32 into 64 slices. And you each have one of those slices according to the computer name that you're on. We're not implementing this policy on this particular line because we want everybody, all of the computers in the lab, to be able to query all of the other computers in the lab. So we're not putting network limits onto this file. All right. Once you do this, you then need to configure the zones. There's two types of zones. There's forward lookup zones and reverse lookup zones onto your DNS server. So your computer can look up names and find IP addresses, or it can look up IP addresses and find names. All right, so it can do both of these tasks. It can do translation both ways. So what you will need to have here is you need to have a zone, which is this. So the zones do not include your computer name. So there is no Prometheus.something in there. Okay, it's only the domain name, as we call it, that needs to be mentioned here. And of course, this will be different for each of you. Okay, so it will have to be your PC name, so Sena, Kuthar, whatever, .netlab.de.port.ac.uk. And this will be configured according to this. Now, this is a file, all right, and this file will exist in var named. We do have an example of this file as well, and I will show it. And this is essentially our new hosts file. This is the file that does the translation for our own virtual machines for any computer that belongs to our domain. That file looks something like this. Okay. That's unfortunate. So what this file does, come on. Apart from everything else that's in here, what's really important is this table right here. Okay, so this will provide the translation of your computer names to your IP addresses. So if a computer is called prometheus.shumi.netlab.uk, which is my computer, that has 3 IP addresses and can respond to these 3 IP addresses. One is my 28.100, which is my IP address on subnet 28. And then I have my VMnet 0 and VMnet 1 network cards that have an address of 3253 and 31253. And all 3 of them are IP addresses that belong to this computer. In exactly the same way, I have the single IP address for vPrometheus 0. I have the 2 IP addresses for vPrometheus 1 and the 1 address for vPrometheus 2. So if you're sitting on computer Sena, and you try to ping vprometheus0.shumi.netlab.de.port.ac.uk, unless I'm running my server and I have this information configured here, you will not get a reply. Okay, your computer will not know how to actually contact it, because there will be no authoritative server running for this particular Shumi domain, and you won't be able to get an answer. Yes?
Why do you have an MX server?
Sorry?
Why do you have an MX instead of mail exchange?
Because that also works for mail exchange servers. So if a mail exchange server queries that, then it gets a reply from the DNS server, because the emails that you send also have a domain at the end, isn't it? So it's up something at port AC UK. Your exchange server needs to be able to, or whatever exchange server you're using, needs to be able to actually find this. Yeah? So it's an optional extra in the file itself to help with other services. All right. So the translation of IP addresses and names mainly happens onto this file. Once you have configured this, then it means that you have your forward zone here, and then any queries that you get about names that look like your names can find the reply for the IP address in there. The same happens and the other way around. So if somebody queries anything, let's say an IP address of 148.197.28 something, then they should be able to get a computer name from it. And for these, we have equally, each of the subnets will have its own DB file, and each of the DB files will need to have an IP address here, which is the IP address of the computer that is providing that conversion. And we have a 28 dB, there is a 30 dB, there's a 31 dB, and a 32 dB as well. Okay, so all these files are available on Moodle, and you can download them. All you need to do is change the IP addresses and the computer names in there. So for example, you can see here, this one is Prometheus Shumi NetLab Port UK. And since I'm working on subnet 30, the IP address of my Prometheus machine on subnet 30 is 30.253. Yeah? So out of the 3 network cards that I have, my VMnet 0 does have an IP address of 30.253. So that's why we mention it here. So once you take care of the zones, and once you create the files that explain the translation for the zones, forward and reverse, you're then ready to move on to the next step. Okay, I went ahead and explained this, that's fine. So, once you have your named.conf file configured, with the correct IP address on the listening port and whoever is allowed to query your server, and you have created your forward and reverse lookup zones as well, you have basically configured all of the main configuration files that are needed for your service to run. Now, in order for it to run, we need to, of course, let it through the firewall as well, so you can add port 53 and allow port 53 through your firewall rules, and that will allow the service to actually be run and be contactable from the outside world on your computer. And once the firewall is taken care of, you can then go on and test the thing and see if it actually works. So the first test that you can do is you can use the command dig, and you can dig the domain, as we call it. So you're going to try and find if somebody will reply when you're looking for this particular domain. So if you're looking for Shumi NetLab Port AC UK, then once you dig that domain, you should be able to get a reply that says, yes, the authoritative server for this domain is 148.197.28.100, which is my Prometheus, which is my server that's running, and a bunch of other detail underneath it as well. Once that works, then you know that your DNS server is working, and you can start configuring your DNS server on other machines on your network as well. Remember, at the moment, Prometheus VP01 and 2 are using Columbus's DNS server in order to resolve names and addresses. You need to change that. So you need to go into the network card settings of all of your networks on your system and change the DNS server from 148.197.28.251 into your own IP address for Prometheus, for your own server. Right. Once you do that, you can actually fully test and see if your DNS server works. First of all, you should be able, by pinging on Prometheus or vPrometheus 0 or 1 and 2, you should be able to go to terminal and ping vprometheus2.culthard.netlab port UK, and you should be able to get a reply, and you should get an actual ping that works. So from all of the virtual machines in your network, you should be able to ping all of the other virtual machines in your network. Okay, so it means that your DNS server Prometheus is working, and your virtual machines 0, 1, and 2 can contact that server and can find the information regarding the translation of IP addresses to computer names. Once that works, you'll need to wait for somebody else in the lab to get to that point as well, and then you can test pinging across other people's computers. Okay, so you need to liaise with somebody else in the lab, the person that's sitting next to you or whatever, and once both of you think that you have your DNS server running, and once both of you can ping your internal names, you should then try to ping external names. So you should try to ping each other's computers and see if you can actually get a reply from somebody else's computer. So by the end of this lab sheet, I should be able to ping vp2.coulthard.netlab.de port SUK from my machine. All right. In all probability, by the time we get to this, I will have configured my DNS server as well. So you should really be able to ping my virtual machines as a test as well. Okay, so you should be able to ping prometheus.shumi.netlab.SUK and my vp01 and 2 and so on. Okay, so if you do that, it means that your DNS server is configured correctly. It is the authoritative server for the domain that you have just created, and it works correctly, and you can use it, and your network and life is complete. Okay, so that will be the end of what we need to do in the labs. All right, so there's 4 lab sheets. You will have 2 hours every week. However, you will have 6 weeks. So next week is consolidation week, so there are no classes. All right. And then after that, we have 6 more weeks, and then the assessment, the 7th week. Okay, so you have 6 weeks for 4 lab sheets. I can tell you now the one that's going to take the longer time is the second lab sheet, the virtual network. Okay, so really if you finish working on the installation of the operating system, you can move on to the second lab sheet. There is no progress-wise, you can move as fast or as slow as you like. It's fine, okay, so we don't mind. And we will help you in the lab in whatever stage you are in any of the lab sheets. Yes?
So it's not your last 2 weeks like for write-ups?
No. So it depends on how fast you will move. So if you finish the 4 lab sheets in 4 sessions, that's fine. However, yes, don't leave the write-up for the end. You will definitely forget details. It's better to progress a little bit slower and keep important details, take screenshots and make notes in your logbook and move like this. It will hinder your pace a little bit, but you will definitely have a more correct, more thorough, more detailed logbook. You can write everything down and you can take screenshots while you're working on the computer, and then later on when you go home or towards the end or whatever, you can write more text and explain in more detail the theory behind everything that we're doing. Okay. However, don't just do everything, leave the screenshots, don't take them and say, okay, I will do this in the last couple of weeks. Because first of all, you might not be able to retake the same screenshots because once you build something, it's built and you won't be able to take progress screenshots. Okay. So it's very important that you keep documentation, you keep screenshots of all of your steps. In fact, if I was you, how I would do it is I would take screenshots of absolutely everything, stick them in the logbook, explain the ones that I want to use, and then later vet all the screenshots, look at them and see, okay, if I'm repeating myself or if I don't need that much amount of detail, delete some screenshots. It's fine. All right. So as long as you get the screenshots and you have the documentation that you need, you can then take care of all of the tiny details in the logbook later on. But that's why we're giving you only 4 lab sheets for 6 lab sessions, because we want you to have time in the lab to actually complete everything. And if you need to go back and take some more screenshots or ask us about something that you missed in the theory and you want to explain, you can go back and do that as well. You can also go to the lab whenever the lab is open and empty, whenever your computer is empty, because the lab is open access. Okay, and I can tell you now that all of Wednesday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, and Friday all day, the lab is empty. Okay, so you can go on work. And most importantly, what I also want you to do is I want you to have a look into assessments and support materials. There is a logbook guide link. So if you click on this, there is a video on my work-related YouTube channel, and it explains everything that you should have on your logbook. Okay, so all of the details of how your logbook should be. It's only 7 minutes. Hopefully I won't bore you too much. But yes. Okay, so when you come into the lab next week, the week after, sorry, yeah, I want you to have a Google Doc ready to use as your logbook, and I want you to have roughly a good idea of what that logbook should look like, what you should have inside it, and how you should actually use it. Of course, it goes without saying that at any point, you can share this Google Doc with me. So let's say you complete the first lab sheet, and you're not sure whether you've done it correctly or not. You can either call me while we're in the lab and ask me to have a look at it, or you can share your logbook with me and ask me to have a look at it and give you some feedback on it. Okay, most of you, if not all of you, will have not done something like this before, so it's a good idea to get some feedback so that we make sure that you get it right, because it is worth 30% of your module, and together with Linda's logbook in the second teaching block, that's going to be 60% of the module, and then the exam is only 40%. So as an assessment artifact, the logbooks are more important than the exam. Okay. Do you have any questions about all this? Yes?
What time is SAI2425 show?
So the lab is open from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. generally, unless the caretakers have something else that they need to do, they need to close early to go somewhere else. But usually it's 8 o'clock, and in fact, they will, towards the end of the semester, the end of the teaching block, they will let you until 9 o'clock. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.